So before we talk through any of the content that we want to this morning, I think we need to begin to look at this year and realize that we come to it with a big sense of thankfulness. Thankfulness for what God has been up to in the people and the community that makes up what we have here at First. Even in a year marked by unexpected twists, God has continued to be good. And there's an analogy that feels fitting for this year. In his book, Canoeing the Mountains, there's a professor and a good Christian who teaches at Fuller Seminary named Todd Bolsinger, and he tells the story of Lewis and Clark, which is really a parable about adaptive leadership. And he tells the story of Lewis and Clark and their grand adventure to go explore the Louisiana Territory. And Bolsinger points out that Lewis and Clark were chosen to lead that expedition to explore the Louisiana Territory for the sole reason that they were the best river navigators we had as a country. No other reason. And their goal was to explore via canoe all the way from what was settled in the east to the Pacific in the west and come back. And that skill set served them very well until they ran smack dab into the middle of the Rockies. And then they had to learn a whole new way of doing things. They had to learn a whole new way of engaging with things and approaching the world, right? They had to learn how to climb mountains and how to navigate all kinds of stuff. And as they learn that whole new way of doing things, sometimes it is a reminder for us that leading anything, involves at some stage having to build a whole new skill set. When you're part of the way through the journey, when you haven't reached the end and suddenly you go, what got us to this point will not get us past this point. And in light of that, I think we've seen God's goodness and faithfulness in what has happened this year and the many things that we've learned. Broadly for us this year, it's really been marked by two things for us as a church. We've been marked by two things. We've learned how to do old things in new ways. That's been true across the board. And two, we're learning how to focus on what is most important to us as a community of faith. This year started off really, at least in my mind, around this time last year, was going to be a year of transition. I had been in the place for a few months. Both Al and Christy had talked to me about stepping off of staff. And after being here and Al and Christy letting me know that they were going to step off of staff, I knew things were going to change. Little did I know how much things were going to change. The first part of the year ran pretty smooth, and we were starting to gear up for the spring and talk about plans for the summer and outreach events and looking forward to the places we were going to go in the fall of 2020. And then on March 12th, the pandemic hit. And at an AC meeting a couple days before, on a Tuesday night, I had someone ask me a question. Hey, what do you think is going to happen with this whole coronavirus thing? And I remember saying, I think it's going to be a big deal. I think it's going to be an event that we're going to have to respond to, but I think we probably have a little bit of time. Again, little did I know what we would be talking about as an AC 48 hours later. But again, even in the midst of that, God was good. We decided we weren't going to take this line down. We weren't just going to be passive and let things come to us. But again, we were going to learn how to do old things in new ways. And suddenly everything was on the table as we try to innovate our way out of where we found ourselves, trusting God to be who God is. And that had a couple of big things that occurred. Programs took a quick and decisive shift. Children's ministry suddenly flipped around and everything slid straight to Facebook. From daily Bible stories read by Sunday school teachers and parents to family trivia night, which were a lot of fun, suddenly connecting and belonging happened there. The trivia nights were always a blast in my household because we're a big chaotic mess and they're screaming and yelling and jumping as we're trying to answer, but everyone else's house felt so calm and quiet until Erica would unmute us all and you'd hear this cacophony of noise erupt. Right? Student ministry did a similar move, right? Everything just moved to digital, and suddenly we had digital game nights and group chats and conversations, finding ways to build relationships and create meaning and place and connection for students, even if now we did it in a digital space versus a physical one. Worship took a massive shift as suddenly we became a production house, learning how to produce, create, shoot, and edit videos, doing sound in different ways and trying to figure out what feels appropriate and right for where we are. We're deeply indebted to the folks, especially on the worship side, of everyone that helps here at First to make it happen. Discipleship, we started book studies, we had daily online devotionals, trying to, again, to help one another be shaped in faith together, even if we couldn't meet in person. all of which was just, again, fundamentally different as we tried to shape one another together. Early summer was a time of retooling and re-entry. We ran a completely digital search process for a middle school director, and it ended up hiring Josiah Heisman as our new middle school director. We also spent a lot of time figuring out how we can safely and sustainably re-enter our building and have public worship again, which we did and was great and meaningful. Fall was marked in many ways by a time of rebuilding and relaunching while we retooled things over the summer to figure out how we can roll them out in the fall. And again, we talked about how we have plans A, B, C, and D. We were able to rebuild and relaunch some of those in the fall. We saw a consistent uptick in people engaging in public worship. We started community groups and house church gatherings and programs, building connection in a time of disconnection. We started a majority of our traditional programming throughout this fall. It all came up different, and we as a leadership team didn't say no to anyone. We just said, here's the terms that we can engage and do it safely. How do we keep everyone safe and still do the work that we feel called to do? Focusing on what is most central and having everything be scalable and flexible. And things that we saw throughout this year are just really interesting to note. Right? If we think back on the year, early on, we pivoted goals, not just to how are we going to survive this, but how do we as a church and community and individually emerge stronger and more focused. We've shown our resilience throughout all of this too, right? I think, look, if we just look at my family can barely agree on what to order for a pizza for dinner. And we showed our resilience as a community in the fact that we are too big to agree on many things, but we stood by one another in order to do all of this together. There's a bunch of decisions that had to be made, some of which were rather hard, and we did that with grace and integrity. We did not have infighting in the way that other churches and organizations did. We did not have backbiting. There was no civil war or protest. We didn't always agree with one another, but we did it with grace and unity, even as we disagree about things. And that's what a church should be. We continued to focus throughout all of that outside of our walls. We continued our work in supporting our missionaries, including being involved with Hand to Hand, Kids Hope, Harvest Stand, and we upped our engagement in a couple of areas too, with World Vision and the Holland Rescue Mission. And honestly, the Kingdom Justice team has really been going after this pretty hard, and they've been doing a great job. We're also really faithful throughout this entire year. When this all originally hit, our giving as an organization went up as we as a team rallied and said, we're not going to let this go. We stand by our church and God will do good things with this. And in a time and in a year when many organizations and churches are expecting and experiencing a decline, we have still been faithful. First continues to be faithful, and God continues to be good. And generally, I've seen us as a community try to be wise and thoughtful. No decisions throughout all of this have been made in a sense of fear or been made rashly. And it is no small thing that when a pandemic is everywhere, we have not had an outbreak here at church. We have not been a super spreader event. And to the best of our knowledge, or at least my knowledge, no one person has contracted COVID-19 from someone else at a church event, which is no small thing considering we exist by gathering people together. And lastly, as I think back on this last year, I've actually been looking at our lobby. It's been really interesting to look at our lobby as of late. I was talking with Julie Chen about this recently, and she observed that the things in our lobby say a lot about who we are, and that's been true throughout all of this entire season. In our lobby right now, for example, we have a drop station for Hand to Hand as we engage in our community. We have Christmas cards for our shut-ins as we take care of one another, and we have giving envelopes as we're generous with our resources to those around us. And it's really got me thinking as we look forward to 2021 that there's a number of things that we're excited about and a number of things that we are leading in and rolling out going into 2021. So the first thing in 2021 is that we're near the final stages of a pastor of care and connecting. We started a search process this fall, and while we aren't quite ready or at the place where we can announce who the candidate is and all the details, we're very close, and the search team continues to be very excited about where that's going, and we look forward to telling you more information, and we are thankful for your patience around all of this. We're also looking to engage with Western Seminary in a Lilly-funded grant called Churches in Mission, and it's a cohort of a number of churches that are coming together to really rally around the idea of how do we know how to do foreign missions, right? We know how to do global missions over there, but how do we as a community do mission here, right? And what are the tools and resources and training that we need? What are the clarity and stories? Who do we need to know, and how do we do it well here? It's a 15-month process around helping churches understand and engage with their community in new ways, helping churches discern how to live in a mission for the next generation. And we're also working to try to figure out how to make our space more hospitable and accessible, so that when newcomers come, as we gather, you can come and join without being distracted, where you know what our values are and how to make your way around the building. And lastly, we're rolling out something that we're calling a dream fund. And while there's many things that we think this could be and how it could be, and we'll have details forthcoming, we're trying to equip people to pursue the call that God has placed on their lives, right? We're trying to help people pursue the call that God has placed before them and answer the question of, what dreams do you have for the kingdom? And how do we as a church make some of those a reality? It's an idea to some degree that's to replicate what happened with the success of Living Threads. What are you called to do, and how do we make that a reality and make it happen? Attending to the shut-ins, caring for children, helping to provide support for business leaders. What is God calling you to do, and what resources do you need? Right? It's really a question of, what dreams do you have, and how could we support those as a community and congregation? And that's a really, really exciting thing that, again, we'll have more information on as we go. Lastly, the fifth thing that we're talking about in looking into 2021 is the RCA has been having a lot of conversation around what's been labeled Vision 2020, which is really about the future of the denomination. We're going to have a lot of education with that. It'll be bathed in prayer. We'll talk about what it is and what it isn't. And as we just work towards making wise decision, again, bathing the whole thing in prayer, as we make those decisions about what the future of the church will be and what it means for us as a community. And so those are the main things that we're talking about, right? There's a lot that's exciting, and while much of our last year has been marked by the experience of this pandemic, it is not the sole thing. It's the context we find ourselves in, sure. And yet God is faithful and God is good. And God is still calling all of us into new territory. God is calling me and God is calling you. And just because the reality on the ground has changed, it does not mean that we cannot fulfill that call. Because we as a community are called so that everyone can hear and experience the saving knowledge and relationship and meaning and power that comes with a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And we're going to do that by making disciples who make disciples, to live into that command and call that we're given from the gospel, even as things shift and change. But let's be honest, things always shift and change. This is a big one, but God will be good, people will be faithful, and we're going to live into our sense of mission and call throughout this 2021 year. And it will be a good thing, even if it's a new thing for many of us.
Hi, my name is Chad Bootsma. I'm the current deacon chair, and I come to you on behalf of all the teams, the staff, as well as the administrative consistory to give you an overview of the proposed budget for 2021. And while I would take responsibility for this budget, the credit and the thanks goes to the staff, the team members, and all those that spent an immense amount of time putting these numbers together. More than absolutely anything, however, amidst all of the unknowns in 2020, the real thanks should be and is directed to God. He has been so faithful, and it has been humbling to watch the members of First Reformed step towards his faithfulness, despite so many unknowns. There's times in the past year when different people would come to me amidst the shutdown especially and ask me how church was doing budget-wise. And I always brought a smile to my face to be able to tell them that God was indeed faithful, and the members of First Reformed were also very faithful. Thank God for his grace, and thank you first for walking in that faith. We still have a few weeks of giving to go in this year yet, and we still need to finish strong, but praise God, for he is very good. If you're unfamiliar with the budget process here at First, midsummer is when the budget forms go out to all the different teams. Now that seems like a lifetime ago. When the letter was sent out, the staff and teams, we were giving them some instruction and direction to remain flat while keeping the door open for ideas and dreams. We wanted to be somewhat conservative, but also not complacent as a church. You'll see some of those dreams as we roll through these sheets. There are also others that stayed exactly the same, such as high school or middle school or Kingdom Justice, as they wait for some stability in their programs. And there'll be more on that in a moment. Again, this is a very broad overview, and I apologize if I go too fast here, but I'm going to bounce through these pretty quickly. So the first, as you're going over the budget, is that first overview that you'll notice about a 1.9% increase overall. For 2021, we propose a budget of $995,382 and change versus last year's approved budget of $973,376. Again, about a 1.9% overall budget increase. On the next, you'll see is administration. On here, you'll see that there's just over a 3% increase over last year's budget. And most notably here is in the subscriptions line item and the fact of how we're doing church now versus how we were doing it a year ago. There's certain subscriptions involved in a lot of the unseen details of how we currently do church and worship on Sundays, both digitally and technically. Just a lot of things you wouldn't have thought about a year ago. RCA assessments also went down. This is a good thing. I feel that over the past couple of years we've done a much better job of monitoring and maintaining these numbers, and these numbers much closer reflect our current congregation. On the next, it's the children's ministry, and as I said before, again, there's no change here from 2020. The next, which would be equipping, one of the biggest notes here that you'll see is the addition of the Right Now Media. If you're not familiar with this resource, please inquire about it. I believe Julie can introduce you to it, but there's a very deep pool of resources of studies there for yourself, or if you want to further your small group. This is also an effort and a tool to try and draw back to community a little bit as well as filling in a gap of teaching, learning, and growing as Christians in this very peculiar time. On the next will be evangelism. Overall, you'll see that evangelism increased just a little under 6%. The thought behind that modest increase in evangelism is due to the challenges, so to speak, that this team has endured in recent budget cuts. They have needed to be creative in years past, and I'm happy to see that this has come back in the right direction here a little bit. A new thing here you'll also notice is that they've considered the If Gathering as a new ministry to step towards. As for the other increases among the missionaries, the team saw the need to bring certain missionaries back to a more informal share. Again, some of those accounts took some of the shaving over the past couple of years, and this just kind of brings them back closer to where they should be. On the next would be facilities. There's a lot of moving parts here, but the biggest change here would be that we thought it was better to move the personnel costs of our facilities back to personnel, which probably obviously makes more sense. Again, there's a lot of moving parts to the facilities budget, but technology, as you will see through more of this budget is in a whole, is something that's woven through the entire budget. And the facilities and part of that budget we've decided to better maintain our technology and our infrastructure due to our obvious current situations. Next would be faith promise. Now you'll notice you see about a 9% decrease. This is some shuffling around here, but the biggest move being that the Kempers were moved back over to outreach. Next is high school or post-high, and as I said earlier, it's to stay exactly the same as 2020. Kingdom Justice, same there, no changes, exactly the same as 2020. Same with middle school, no change. Again, there's a lot of plans for these teams, but they're heavily dependent on COVID and what that next chapter looks like. On the next, personnel. Now here's typically one of our larger investments, obviously, investing in people. You will see some modest increases here, but the biggest being the moving of some distributed personnel costs back into this actual personnel fund. Last, but certainly not least, worship arts and ministry. Here too, you'll see a modest increase. And again, some of this is related to technology and how we worship differently today than we did a year ago. There's some good ideas in this budget. One of the initiatives is to maintain and enhance the musical talent into a Sunday worship experience, as well as backing up our current team. So that's it. To recap, the proposed budget for 2021 is $995,382, or about a 1.9% increase over last year. And on behalf of the teams, staff, and administrative consistory, we humbly request your support for this 2021 proposed budget. Thank you.